Thank you for joining us here on this episode of windsurftoots.com. Thank you for everybody that's been viewing the videos. This week's video is actually a pretty comprehensive deployment methodology for Windows products. Thank you should go out to Jordan from the Green Bay area. He gave me the idea for this video. And at first I was just going to do a series on Windows deployment services, which you'll be seeing we're going to use part of. But it doesn't necessarily allow the deployment of operating systems with installed application and gives kind of light touch user flexibility to install the OS with applications. So in this video, what we're actually going to be doing is we are going to be deploying Windows 7 64-bit with Microsoft Office and then that snare agent that we've seen before. And a lot of the methodologies that you'll see in this video you could use with other sorts of applications. So you're not limited just to Microsoft Office or Snare or something like that with the tools that you'll be seeing, as long as the application you're trying to install on top of your operating system has some command line options for installation. You'll actually be able to roll out these packages on all of your machines. Really easy for the users to do. This is very similar to how we deploy our workstations and laptops in our organization. So it's going to be a long video. I hope I'm able to get through this all in one setting. If it runs too long, we'll break it out into two pieces. But let's get started. What we have as a base is we have our server here, and as usual we are going to be using Windows Server 2008 R2. It is in our domain. This server just happens to be called deployment. And what we're going to do is we are going to be using two pieces. One is the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. This is the 2010 version. It's a 64-bit version. If you go to the website, I will have the link for you to download this. And this is a fairly complicated tutorial, so I'll have a written kind of procedural document that you can follow as well. So we're going to be using this Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, and then we are also going to be using the WDS, Windows Deployment options. So we're going to start right in and get to it. Then I'm going to kind of explain how things work with this as we go for time's sake. So as you can see, we're going to select Windows Deployment Services, and we're actually going to select File Services. It's a pretty bare server. We're going to install these roles, and there are two options. There is the deployment server, which gives you the functionality of the Windows Deployment Services, and then the transport server, which will give you, most importantly, it gives you a couple other things, but multicasting. So where multicasting would be really great is, let's say you have 25 workstations or 100 workstations or 200 workstations that you want to deploy in your environment, and you don't want to saturate the bandwidth on your Ethernet segment. If your switches and routers are multicast capable, you will have essentially one broadcast per se, but it's actually a multicast, and all of your hosts will pick up on this one multicast section. So that's kind of just a rough breakdown of these two options. So we're going to select next, and we're going to select our file server. We're going to have some file shares that we're going to deploy our operating system images from. I'm going to go next and do install. So this portion's very easy. Just as a heads up, especially when we get into the operating system installations, I'm actually going to be trying to cut out a lot of the time where you're just sitting and waiting for things to install. So okay, now you can see we have Windows Deployment Services set up. It's not configured yet, in our file service. Before we go any further, I'm going to install our Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. And it's a pretty straightforward installation. Just going to do entire features, just make sure we've got everything, and install, and yes. Now, what you're actually going to discover as we go through this is that we're actually going to be building most everything in this deployment toolkit. Um, Also, as you can see here, I've got a folder called Windows 7 x64 source. So what I did is I just copied everything from my Windows 7 DVD onto this folder, onto the local hard drive, so it would be faster, so I'm not pulling information off a DVD, and that's just to speed things up. I would actually recommend that you do the same thing. Just a little bit about this computer. We have our local operating system disk, and then we have another hard drive here, or it's actually a virtual drive. We're in VMware, and this is going to be the deployment share that we're going to be using. So I'm just going to minimize here. Now what we're going to be doing is, you can see that we have the server installed, but it's not configured. So what we're going to do is we're going to configure server, select next, and what we're going to do is we are going to browse to that, what was that drive? That is the E drive here. We're going to leave most of the defaults. We might have to make this. Okay, so we just selected our E drive, E remote install. That's going to be our share that WDS is going to use. And we have a couple options here. Do not respond to any client computers. It effectively allows us to configure this server, but it won't service anything. Respond only to known client computers, or respond to all computers known and unknown, but require administrator approval for unknown computers. So we're going to select this option, and what you're going to see is, so all the computers that pixie boot, so it's a requirement by your clients, when they pixie boot and when they request an operating system and an install from this deployment server will tell us that we have clients ready for an install, but they're waiting for us to approve them, and you'll see that. So select next. It's going to copy some files that we need here. Okay, and we're not going to add images to the server now, because we're actually going to be using this deployment workbench to build our images. Okay, so we're just going to finish this. Now let's take a quick look at what we have here. So this is our install images. We don't have anything in here, and we don't have any boot images. Now it's really important to understand the difference between install images and boot images. If you're familiar with the boot PE environment, the pre-executable environment that Windows uses to kind of bootstrap your systems, this is what you're looking at here. And it's an image that we'll use, and we'll send it down via TFTP, so the trivial FTP protocol, to our workstations when they request the operating system install. So that's like the Bart's boot disk, if you've heard of that. The install images is actually the OS, and that is what we'll be pushing down to our workstations to install. And this will actually work for Windows Server 2008 and R2 as well. Under this Pending Devices tab, this is where we will see the workstations that are ready for an install. Okay, so this is where we'll go to approve them. On multicast transmissions, if you see, if we create this, and we'll just do test, this will give, oh, we don't have any image groups. I'll show you that after. We can create some scenarios where we'll wait for 10 computers to boot up and request an install, and then the install will fire off, let's say when we have 10, 25, 100 computers all ready at one time to receive this install package. So this will give you just a brief overview of how this is done. Drivers, just for the sake of time, most of the time for a workstation computer, Windows will be okay on drivers. I'll leave that for you to look up on your own for any special drivers that you may have on your system. So this gives you a little introduction to the WDS portion. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to this deployment workbench, and this is actually where we're we have to pull down one more thing, the Windows Automated Toolkit. So we have that automated toolkit, and what I'm going to do is it comes in the form of an ISO file, and what we'll do, let me browse here, internal data, downloads. This is the automated toolkit, and there are different versions of automated toolkits for Windows Vista, 7, etc., etc. So make sure that you are downloading the right one for your particular client. So we're going to load that in the DVD-ROM drive. And as you can see, it's going to start up and start running. We're going to install it. And as you can see here, there's a couple of options, step-by-step deployment, etc., etc. What we're concerned with is Windows AIK setup because we want to install this. Just going to run through this installer. And next, I agree. Going to leave it for everybody. And again, this is a pretty straightforward installation. Okay, so if you were like me and went and got a cup of coffee, welcome back. Alright, so the automated toolkit has been successfully installed, so we're going to close this out, close this out, close here. Alright, let's fire this up one more time. Deployment workbench. Okay, so this is our workbench, all right, and this upper section is mostly documentation. I would definitely recommend at your leisure going through, taking the time to look through this, look through the documentation, various news components that they have, things like that. So what we had here, we're going to create a new deployment share. As you can see, there was a remnant from when I was testing this lab, but we're going to create a new deployment share. All right, and we're going to put it again on that E drive, and we're just going to call it E deployment share. We might have to make it. Oh, okay, and it's going to do that fine. And we'll call this deployment share. Yeah, sure, deployment share $. Actually, just maybe for the sake of typing, we'll just do DS $. Okay, and we can give it a description, whatever you feel is appropriate for your environment, and ask if an image should be captured. Sure. What we're going to do, actually, yeah, sure, we'll do that. And we'll go next. Ask user to set the local administrator password. Sure. Ask user for product key. No. Okay. So we got a little summary of what we're going to do here. And this is going to run through and start that process. Okay. So we're going to finish this here. And now what we're presented with under here is we're presented with a couple of options, all right? So applications will be anything that we want to install into our operating system. Operating systems, I'm sure you can guess what this is, and task sequences. Task sequences are pretty important. It's actually going to be what puts together everything, I guess you could say. It's putting together the operating system with the application, things of that nature. Out-of-box drivers, again, you could just do import drivers and you could point it at a directory, things of that nature, but we don't really want to worry about that for right now. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start off by importing a new operating system. And you can see here, we just right-clicked on operating system, import new operating system. Okay, and now you're going to be presented with a couple of different options. If we were to have imported an image into our Windows deployment services server over here, we could import them from here, but we haven't done that yet because we actually want to create what we're going to do in the workbench. So full set of source files, And this is basically what we're going to be working with here. Like I said, I copied the install files from the Windows 7 DVD to my local hard drive. So I'm going to go next, and I'm going to point to that directory. So I'm going to go to the computer, and I have my E drive here, and then I have my directory there. I'm going to select OK, next. And what I'm going to do is I want to give this a specific directory name. So we'll do this because it'll actually help you if you give this a really vivid name where to find certain files that you're going to be using in your Windows deployment server. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be doing like custom install, and this will help us find some of these files that we'll need. So select next and next. Now this is going to copy these files from our source directory to our next directory. You could have also done a move, which would be a little bit faster, but just for the sake of it, I just did a copy, and I'll come back after these are finished. Copy. Okay, so as this is finishing up, just take a look and see what's going on here. Copying E Windows, this source directory, to our E deployment share. So wherever you were pulling these files from, essentially this would be your source, and this is telling you where your destination is. So as we can see, everything was added successfully. We're going to select finish. And this is now going to populate our operating systems. Now, if you've ever worked with a Windows 7 a DVD install, you probably know that what you actually have is all of the different operating systems on the single CD. And as you can see here, that's exactly what we were presented with. But we don't need Home Basic and Home Premium. So essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to delete those because we don't even want to be bothered with them. So we're going to just get them out of here. And we're actually also going to be deleting Ultimate as well. We're just going to be dealing with Professional. Now, if you needed Ultimate, that's fine. You could run with this same exact process that I'm going to use with Professional as you could with Ultimate. But we're just going to delete it just to get it out of there. We want to keep things neat and tidy. Okay. And I want to give this a little bit of a more easy to digest name. So I want to just do Windows 7 Professional. Okay. So this is what we have here. We've got Windows 7 Professional, and this is what we'll be working with. Now, what we want to do is we want to figure out what sort of applications we want to install with this operating system. Okay. Now, this is going to be a little bit different based on what application you are installing. Most people will probably want to install Microsoft Office, so that is an example that we're going to use here. And I don't know if your work environment is like mine, but essentially what we have at our work environment, we have a site license for our operating systems and our software, things like that, and they're out on a network share and people have read access. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We are going to install our application. We're not going to bundle these source files with our OS. They're going to be out on a network share. Okay, so you would need a network share somewhere out. It could be this server that you're working from. It could be anywhere, but you need a share out on your network. So we're going to select next, and we're going to be installing Microsoft Office 2010. And we'll do 2010. Just fill in some of these values here. Next. Now, this is going to be something that you'll need to pay attention to, and something that you will need to do a little bit of kind of reading on your own, depending what your environment is like. So I'm going to walk you through this, but you're still probably going to have to modify this to your environment. So the syntax for this will be something like this. So what we have here is I went out to my application server. In this case, it's 2K8R2 app01, and I have the share out here, and I'm going to go Office 64. So again, what I've done is off the Office CD, I've just copied these files over to a network share. So the install path is going to be this right here. And if you're familiar with the Windows environment, this is what's called a UNC path. So we have our server name, the drive, the directory, and the executable. So we're going to copy that and we'll just paste it here. Now, for Microsoft Office, when you're automating an install, there's something called a config XML file. All right, and what we're going to do is we're going to tell this setup.exe to go look for that file. So we're going to use /config. Now we're going to go back to this share here, and I'm going to show you where that's at. So in this Office directory, you will see that there is a folder called Pro plus RWW. And in here, there is a config.xml file. So we're going to get this directory here, and we're going to do config.xml, and we're going to copy this whole thing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to post an example of my config.xml file and maybe a sample one to download so you can see it. What you will need to do is you will need to enter your license key if you have a site license, something like that, for your specific environment, okay? But this is where you need to go. So the syntax that you're going to need to fill out here is the share, where you're going to store the executable, /config, and then that UNC name to that config.xml file. Now the working directory, the easiest way to do this will go C program files. That'll just be the simplest place to put it. And since this is a 64-bit install, we don't need to go to that x86 directory. That is for legacy, x86 programs. So this is what you have here. You have the UNC share, where your setup.exe is, /config, and then the UNC share and mapping to that config.xml file. That's very important. So go next and next, and that's it. That's how you create this new application path here. And now what you see is we have Microsoft Office 2010. Now, just to show you that this is not just a Microsoft thing, we're going to do another application. If you are with us for our snare install running syslog on a Windows server, we're going to install snare silently as well. So for this is Intersect Alliance, this is snare, and let's go next. And from the command line, we're going to go back out to that application server, and this time we are going to run this executable here. And again, I'm just copying and pasting. I know my applications out here, and I just happen to know that in order to do the silent install for snare, it's just /very silent. And again, our install directory will be C, and go to program files here. I try to just do copy and paste. I find they make less typos that way. So again, this is not a Microsoft application. As long as your application supports a silent install, you can use it here. Okay, so now what do we have? We have an operating system that we've imported, okay, and we have the applications that we want to install on our operating system. So what we need to do here is we need to create a new task sequence. This is very important because if you go to boot up your environment into Pixie Boot, if you don't have your task sequence, it won't do anything for you. So we're going to do new task sequence, and what this task sequence we'll just call it Windows 7, This will be Windows 7 with Office and Snare. Let's call it that. You could add some comments if you like. And we're going to be using standard client task sequence. There are a couple options here, but we're just going to be using this one. And this is the operating system that we're going to select. Now, I am not going to specify a product key because I do not have access to a site-wide product key that I can use for this demonstration. If you were to have a site-wide product key, you would put it here, okay? And then each time your host booted up, as you can see here, it will need to contact the Microsoft Activation Service. That's how they know you're not pirating. So when we do this install, we will be prompted for an activation key. If you have a site license key, you'd put it here. Go next. And we're going to see the full name in our organization, and we can even do Internet Explorer homepage, and we're going to do the awesome, what do you think, winservetoots.com. That should be everybody's homepage. We'll go next. And the administrator password, we'll do our super secret administrator password to install our applications. And next. Okay. So now we have this task sequence that we can use for our WDS server to propagate out to our workstations. So now that we have this task sequence section finished, we have our Windows 7 with Office and Snare. What we need to do is we need to come up here and we need to update deployment share. And what this is going to do is it's going to generate all of the information into a new boot process and ISO image for our deployment. So we do want to optimize the boot image. We don't want to compress it. Okay, so we're just going to leave those options. We're going to click next and next. All right. So now, if you haven't done it before, that could take a little while and a little bit of time on your host. And what we're going to be looking for is this lighttouch.pe. All right. So what this is a brand new type of boot image that we're going to be able to use for our deployment purposes. So we're going to go over to our WDS server. Okay, and we're going to select a new boot image. And what we'll do is we'll just do an add image group just to organize it. So this will be Windows 7. And we'll right click and do add new image. So now, if you remember that light touch, what I want to do, and you might, I actually have sometimes the issue locating these images, so we actually want to search for light touch PE. Okay, well, let's see what we got here. So now you can see under deployment share boot, we have that WIM file that we're looking for. So we're going to select here. Let's go back to our WDS server and let's see what we've got here. Operating system deployment share boot. Okay, and this is a 64-bit install, so that's what we're going to be doing there, and that's that. Oh, we don't want the install, we need a boot image. I'm sorry, let me getting ahead of myself. Cancel this. Our boot image is here, and we're going to go to that location for our boot image. 64-bit there. So again, under the boot image, it was the deployment share boot lighttouch.wim. Okay, call that there. This is going to go through. This could take a second. Oh, went pretty quick. And finish. So now, under our Windows 7 images, let's add here. This is our install image now. So add install image. And let's do deployment share. And let me see, I'm just going to search for our WIM files here. So star.wim. Okay, x64. So this is boot, this is deployment share, this is our operating system. Okay, so this is where we're going to be going here. here, operating systems, Windows 7 x64 custom install, and I believe that was under sources and install.wim. So select next. Again, we just need our professional. I'm going to install this. Now this actually could take a little bit, checking the integrity of the source image file, so I'm just going to pause the video and we'll come back when that's done. Okay, so this successfully added to our deployment server here. I'm going to do finish here. So now we have this deployment image, we have our boot image, and now what we're going to do is we are actually going to fire up our Windows 7 workstation. But what you need to do in order for some of these things to be successful, you're going to need to give the actual computer that you're deploying these images from permissions within Active Directory. So we're going to move over to our domain controller here, and we just went and we did our dsa.msc, and by default all new hosts are added to the computer's organizational unit. So what you're going to have to do is delegate control, next, and we want to add a user. But we're not going to add a user, we're actually going to add a computer. So we're going to have to click our object types here, go computer, select OK, and we're going to have to add that deployment server. So I'm going to type deployment, check names, and it found the server. So OK, next, and we're going to do a custom task, all right? And we are going to allow it to create selected objects, and we want it to be able to create computer objects, and we'll do full control here on the permissions that we want to delegate, and select next, and this will allow our deployment server itself to add computers to this organizational unit. Okay, so we're back here. Now let's fire up our workstation that we have here. As you can see, it's going out and it's going to require us to hit F12. So remember when we were showing you earlier about F12 and things like that? Browse through these options at your leisure. I would recommend looking at them. We respond to all clients, and let's see where that is, and see here, require the user to press F12. So what this is going to do is, so next time this host boots up and it already has an operating system, if the user doesn't press F12, it's not going to overwrite the operating system. So now under pending devices, see, we have that device here ready to be installed. Now I will show you this multicast. We're not going to be using it because we're just using one host, but we could create a multicast transmission and this install image, next, and we have a couple options here. We could set up a multicast when there's, let's say, 25 hosts that come, and that will start at any time. We could set it up just to start the multicast transmission at a certain time of the day, or when both conditions are met. So that's an option that you have there. I'm just going to cancel out of there, but take a look at that. You might need it. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to name and approve. So we will do Win7WS01. That's what we'll name the host. And you can see it was approved. And now let's go back to our workstation. This might take a moment. And as you can see, this is now kicking off with that light touch PE_x64 file that we generated from our workbench. Now, as you can see, this install process looks very different already from what you're used to when you are installing Windows products. So we're going to go through this, and as you can see, it's going to have run the deployment wizard to install a new operating system. And usually what we do, at least where I work, is there will be a set of printed instructions when we get a new laptop. We'll plug it in and it'll give us these sort of names and things like that that we have to enter in. So in this case, I'm going to use this user, and the domain is windsurftoots.wst. And this is, remember that package that we created, Windows 7 with Office and Snare. And the computer name that we will create is Win7 Workstation 01. We do want to join the domain, so windsurftoots.wst. This is the username. Now we could actually even put this computer into an organizational unit if we wanted to do that, but we'll leave this the default. We don't need to restore any user data or settings. We can leave the defaults here. It's English. You could change it if you are from somewhere else. And my particular time zone is the Eastern time zone, so I'll pick that. And look, these are the applications that are available to our users to install in an automated fashion. So we will select Microsoft Office and our Snare client. So we'll select that, and the administrator password. This will be what we're going to be using. And then this will give us the details of what we're going to be installing. Now this is going to kick off a whole complete Windows 7 workstation install, and I don't necessarily think you want to sit and watch that. So we're going to kick this off, and it's going to gather the information, and I'm going to bring you back when the installation is just about finished. I'll show you when it starts silently installing Microsoft Office. So let's say you're handing out these workstations to people with just a simple install checklist. It will go through and install Office for you, install all your applications, everything that you need, so you can literally just walk around, lay down a new computer, have it boot up, give your employee a very, very simple set of instructions to follow, and they will end up with a fully functional operating system with all of the applications that you choose to deploy on it. So I'm just going to take a little break now and stop this video, and we'll come back when it's just about done installing. Just to give you a brief screen grab here, you can see here that it's currently running the action of installing the operating system and installing that custom image that we specified from our Windows deployment workbench. Okay, so as you can see here, we're on our way back. Windows is kind of finished going through installing its first phase. Many of you are familiar, if you've installed Windows 7 before, with this point in the install process. It's gone through, rebooted, it's come back up, and it's going through and continuing to configure the machine. So now what we're going to see is this should look pretty familiar. And if you remember, we did not give it a product key. So in a few moments here it should ask for that product key, but if you do have a site license available, if you go through back in that in the deployment toolkit like I showed you, you had the opportunity to enter it there. So in our specific case, we're not going to enter a product key, we're going to skip that phase, but it's going to ask us for one. You would not see that step if you entered your site license when working in the Microsoft deployment workbench. Okay, so here we are at the product key entry point. Again, if you were to have entered your site license, you wouldn't be seeing this. We're just going to skip this for the time being, and it's going to finalize these settings. So once we had gone through and made those initial inputs that we all walked through, we have not touched the host up until this point, and you wouldn't have had to touch the host at this point if you were to have entered your site license. So now you can see this is preparing your desktop, and what I want to show you is this is going to go through the install of the Snare syslog agent, and it is going to go through a completely silent install of Microsoft Office 2010. Again, these are options that may or may not be relevant to you. Most companies will use Microsoft Office, and it is a way to deploy it silently. As you can see here, the light touch installation process is now starting that Microsoft Office install that we defined in our application group. So I'm going to let this go through and run. We don't need to sit here and watch this progress bar go through, but what I'll do is once this is finished and the snare portion kicks off, I want you to see that that's installing as well. So this will work for Microsoft and non-Microsoft products alike. Okay, I couldn't catch it fast enough because the snare server installs so fast. So the script finished running, and let's see what we have now. So we have our host here. Let's go to the Start menu and go to All Programs. And as you can see, we have our Intersect Alliance. This is our snare for Windows, our application there. And we have our complete Microsoft Office install here. Now again, I will include a link to customizing your Microsoft Office configuration file. That is something that you will have to do. Ours, we had it be totally silent. You can have it so that your user can select the applications that they like if you wish. But now what we did is we've done a light touch installation. We have installed, in this case, Office and our syslog agent. You could install any other application that you choose this way, as long as there are command line options for your application install. So as you can see here, the operating system deployment completed successfully. Do we have any exciting details? Nope, not really, because we got 0 errors and 0 warnings. That's what we like. We're going to select Finish here. And now your computer is 100% ready to roll for any of your staff that you may have to deploy applications and new hosts out to. Thank you very much for watching this episode here on windsurftoots.com. I know it's a longer episode, but hopefully a lot of system administrators out there will be able to use this. This is something that's very, very common and isn't always necessarily as easy or as straightforward as it could be. So thank you for watching. Again, if you appreciate the videos, do take time to click the ads. It helps support the pieces of hardware that I buy to create these videos. Again, thank you so much. As of today, we broke 200 subscribers and we're almost at 40,000 views. Considering the site has only been up for about 4 months, that's a really big accomplishment, at least for me. So thank you so much for all of your support. And again, please watch here on windsurftoots.com.